Welcome into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where Drew's favorite team is undergoing some turmoil, to say the least. We'll talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and the end of their season from a media standpoint, as well as Pat McAfee's popularity on College GameDay, which is fluctuating in the wrong direction after his third season on the show. But Drew, let's start there with your beloved Pittsburgh Steelers and a wild card game that did not go their way on Monday night on ESPN. And a lot of media fallout from it.
To say the least.
Brendon, Kleen. That's Drew Lerner. I don't think I said that. We're on X Live for the first time. We're here for you 3 times a week. But tell me, why do you think this happened in the first place? So much change after a fairly successful season where both the QB and the coach are now, talked about in our circles, where it could have just been another pat on the back and get back to it next year.
Well, I think it had run its course in Pittsburgh. As a Steelers fan, as you noted, there's a large and growing portion of the fan base that were ready to move on. I think Tomlin himself, obviously coming to this decision, he was ready to move on. I think actually the owners, Art Rooney II, would have preferred to keep him on for at least another season, perhaps to finish out his contract with the team. I don't think they had any plans of moving on. If you look at the beat reporters that were there this morning, they were all reporting that people in the building were shocked that this happened. There had been sources rumbling, saying that maybe Tomlin had been thinking about it. I think clearly he had been thinking about it for quite some time. He's not someone that would typically come to this hasty of a decision. Some reporters have even said he's considered this dating back to before the season, maybe circling this as his final year in Pittsburgh. But it really does beg the question, what is next for Mike Tomlin? Is he going to seek another head coaching job? Or, as has been kind of hinted at by a lot of NFL insiders, Adam Schefter, a lot of the NFL Network insiders, have all kind of indicated that he is more likely to end up on television next year, which, I would tend to believe that because, I think he would prefer to have his lay of the land and get to pick and choose kind of what his next situation is like. And I'm not sure he'd be able to do that this year, considering it was his decision to step down from the Steelers head coaching job, which would portend that the Steelers actually will have some say in where he would go for his next job.
Yeah, a lot of things make this feel very similar to the Sean Payton situation from a couple of years ago, where he went to Fox for one season, had his rights retained and had to be traded, and then ultimately takes that Broncos job the next cycle, where he had certainly more control and has been able to rebuild that organization and his image in fairly short order, now getting the 1 seed in the AFC. That went about as good as it possibly could have. We can't know yet if that is how good it could go for Mike Tomlin, but I think that how long this layoff even lasts is going to factor into whether, we're talking about Tomlin in our space on the sports media side next year and in what capacity we're doing so, right? Because you mentioned it, like even before this Monday into Tuesday, we were hearing Tomlin rumored to be somebody who could get one of these jobs, and there's no shortage of places he could do it. Matt Ryan leaving CBS, Bill Cowher's contract is up at the end of the year there. Jimmy Johnson never was replaced at Fox. ESPN, not exactly married to its Sunday show, although that's the less, shiny version of their studio stuff. NBC, we've talked about not loving that one for a while, but it's weird to me, Drew, that was so widely known ahead of time that, it's Mike Tomlin. He clearly and easily could have kind of tested the waters a little bit and known that there wasn't going to be a job or that he didn't even want to take a job. But it feels a little different than it was if we're using that Sean Payton comparison, where it sort of felt like this part-time last resort thing for Payton back then. He wasn't even really a full-time part of that show, to now Tomlin being talked about as like the bell of the ball, like an actual target. There's going to be this market for him. Why do you think that is how it goes? It makes me wonder if he's going to do it for longer than just a year.
Well, to me, I think Mike Tomlin is very savvy with public relations. He's been that way for the entirety of his time in Pittsburgh. He's obviously well known for keeping a tight ship there. He has a reputation of keeping players that might be problematic on other rosters under wraps in Pittsburgh. And I think that is a testament to how he has dealt with the media in the past. And so I think these strategic leaks that he might be interested in television aren't a coincidence. I think he's told select people who have told other people that have gotten this kind of word out there that he might want to do television at least for a year. That being said, everything Tomlin has said in the past, be it in interviews, in press conferences, he is a football coach, right? I don't know if I see him as a long-term player in the media. Like I just was reading a few minutes before we got on this podcast, a quote that he gave to The Athletic a few years ago, to
calling it
NBC,
the dark side.
Right. Yeah. To NBC's Fred Gaudelli, saying he will never join the dark side. But I do think Tomlin knows he has a knack for this stuff. There's a reason he's heard from every television executive in the business that he would have a warm seat waiting for him on whatever show he wanted. And it's because he is one of the most unique and talented communicators in the game of football. You listen to him on any platform, interview, press conference, even he's one of the coaches, if you get him at halftime, he's actually going to say something that you might actually perk your ears up and be like, oh, this, I'm interested in what he has to say. It's not one of those situations like Bill Belichick where he's just going to give you a non-answer. So I think these are the people in the know that have talked to him in the informal settings when I'm talking about television executives that know he would be good on camera. And I think Tomlin does have an appreciation for his ability to communicate football to the broader masses.
Sort of seems like this was probably even more of an open secret than the very open secret it became, but out of respect to Tomlin and maybe Rodgers and just that Steelers organization, it was tiptoed around, and now we're just getting to the real, fallout here. And I just think, agreed, Tomlin's going to be great. He's only 53. I can't imagine he just suddenly retires into a TV career for the rest of his, professional life or anything, but I think he'll be great at it. And you can only imagine how strong of a, viral moment creator he can be when he's not holding back. I think if he's already that entertaining and sharp with that gruff persona that he can kind of put on as well, you just would love to see what he could be when he's just solely focused on, educating, informing, entertaining. Always that little bit of wonder of how critical and authentic and truthful a coach is going to be in those spots. Just like with anybody, we saw that with Bill Belichick, for instance. But I think Tomlin will be great, and I think the actions of every executive lining up to hire him speaks much louder than whatever I have to say here. But where would you want to see him land? What, like, in terms of the casts we know are in place around the networks and around the league? Is there a show you think he'd be a good fit on? Is there a network you think he'd be a good fit on, or good no matter what?
I think he will be good no matter what, but I think he would slot best into that Sunday Night Football show, Football Night in America on NBC. I think his rapport with Tony Dungy could actually elevate some of the people that they already have going there. Mike Florio is very keyed into what's happening in Pittsburgh. I think there's an affinity there between them. And, I just think he deserves kind of like a prime time, everyone's watching this one show type of platform. I know Andrew Marchand of The Athletic reported earlier today that Fox would be the front runner. I read that more so maybe that Fox wants
they're the most
be the front runner.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might be the most interested.
Well, we've talked about that NBC show multiple times, I think, since you started joining us more regularly, Drew. And it's like, if I'm any talent, on-air analyst for the NFL, I don't know. And maybe looking at who they've hired, maybe their budget isn't quite as deep, although I think it could get deeper if they didn't have 19 people trying to do that show. Maybe that's part of why there's not as many people lining up to do it. But that's where I would want to be. I would want to sum up the day, and like sometimes it gets awkward because the late game will go late and then you only get 10 minutes before whatever. I understand some of that, but I want to talk after the bulk of the games have happened and then set up this usually awesome exclusive window game on my network. I don't like credit to Terry Bradshaw and people who have made an awesome career out of the early shows, but you're just guessing, you're predicting, you're setting up. You don't know what's going to happen. You're just sort of, freewheeling to a degree. That feels like the place to go would be that NBC spot, and they've been traveling more and all that sort of stuff. So it could definitely use a refresh, and there's no better way, I think, to do it than to get the guy that everyone wants.
And here's one other thing, and we can leave this topic here after that. Every other show, you think of Fox's show, they have Terry Bradshaw. CBS's show, they have Bill Cowher. Monday Night Countdown on ESPN, they have Ryan Clark. I don't know if any show wants to double up on former Steelers. So if you put NBC out there, they're actually the only show that doesn't have a prominent former Steeler on their cast. I think that is another reason why Mike Tomlin would be a really good fit for that network.
Feels like we're definitely in the Steelers and Patriots era, sort of coming off of the success that both of those teams had. Not of course, as overwhelming as the Cowboys stuff has been in the past, but that's kind of the moment we're in here, coming off of that Roethlisberger, Manning, Brady chokehold on the AFC. Let's get to Pat McAfee. We'll leave Aaron Rodgers. We don't know that he's retired. I think that there's a lot more to be said as far as Rodgers' future as a media figure, whether that means broadcasting or what it ends up looking like, and sort of his legacy. Very much could be its own slew of think pieces and podcast conversations, Drew. So we'll wait until we get clarity there. But let's get into Pat McAfee here. An interesting result from this annual Athletic reader survey, fan survey that they do over there. Chris Fanini has joined us here on the show to talk about it once before. And they ask their readers, anyone in the college football world, to basically answer a bunch of questions about the experience of consuming the sport on a year-to-year basis, right? So who's your favorite broadcast group? Who's your favorite analyst? What's your favorite show? And then with the most high-profile people, somebody like a Pat McAfee, just straight up, do you like or dislike or not have an opinion on them, right? And so this in the past has gotten McAfee's attention, and that's sort of why we're talking about it, more so than just reacting to, what a few thousand people who read The Athletic think. His dislike numbers rose to nearly half of respondents this year over there, Drew, and up to 49.5%. That's a little higher than the first year they asked, the first year he was on the show, but a pretty big jump from last year where you started to think, hey, maybe this is just settling in for people, and the dislike was around 40%, 42, I think, rather than closer to 50, and now we're going in the wrong direction. I have to say, I was trying to think back on, was there a moment or some kind of problem or controversy along the way throughout this college football season and this year of College Game Day, Drew, and I came up empty. I really don't get why people would veer backward in terms of the experience of McAfee on that show.
Well, I'm going to start with the boring answer before getting into, kind of the more interesting stuff. And that's we shouldn't be putting a lot of, thought into a survey with a few thousand readers. There's always going to be statistical noise, fluctuations between, we don't know it's the same people from 42%.
Last year who responded, right? This is not a university conducting a controlled over time, measured survey. This is random for the most part.
Right. And we're also talking about a subset of readers in The Athletic that might not be the broadest cross-section of college football fans. This might be people that, have a little bit more money to pay for a monthly subscription to a sports website, Maybe they're not the typical ESPN viewers. So with all those caveats aside, I do think there is something to be said for maybe a bit of overexposure of Pat McAfee, perhaps playing into these numbers. He's become more established on ESPN. He has a bigger role on Game Day. This is the first year where he has taken over for Lee Corso's final pick and kind of been the finale of that show, which, if we're talking about College Game Day, the highest point in that show, like the biggest audience, is always going to be for that last pick. A lot of people aren't watching the 10 a.m. and the 11 a.m. hours.
Yeah, he's
They're
the star
tuning in at 11:55.
Undeniable.
So you're seeing Pat McAfee's monologue, and that's like your only perception of College Game Day. And maybe because he's taken on that bigger, more prominent role, people aren't as big a fan. But it's interesting, in this same survey, I think I have the numbers here, 84% of respondents said they preferred College Game Day to Big Noon Kickoff. College Game Day had its highest television ratings ever recorded this year. People love Pat McAfee's kicking contest. So there's a lot of other data points here that would suggest that College Game Day is having a really successful run with its new cast. I believe in this same survey, Nick Saban had a 73% approval rating. So there's a lot of positive indicators aside from McAfee about Game Day. Yet, there's still this kind of nagging stat out there that McAfee has addressed in the past about a lot of people not liking him on the show.
Yeah, of course, after the 2023 poll, when the disapproval, if you want to call it that, was super high, he had kind of a will he, won't he leave thing that has sort of continued ever since, but was spurred upon by that for sure. And even this year, he had that random morning on his Instagram story where he posted the screenshots of a bunch of like middle-aged, supposedly typical American College Game Day viewers, and went on kind of a weird rant about them and their dislike for him and whatever. It seems to really bother him that people don't at least say that they like him or can't like admit to it, or whatever way you want to put it. Because at this point, like, if you like College Game Day, you like Pat McAfee. Like, I just sort of don't see, there's only so much hate watching that I actually believe can really be going on here, when the numbers for that show suggest it is rebounded from a weird kind of down point when they were trying to figure out the post-Corso plan, the Saban edition, which you mentioned. It's just kind of gotten new life breathed into it. The sport is at an all-time high in terms of popularity, and he's the fixture and the center of all of it. So I just can't imagine that if you're flipping ESPN on every Saturday morning and sitting there, that you're really just like miserable the whole time that Pat McAfee is on your screen. You're just sort of, I think, you don't like the idea of him maybe. And that, I think, is an interesting thing that ESPN has to kind of reckon with.
Right. I agree with that. And here's what I would kind of turn this question around on its head. How many people watching College Game Day week to week would think the show is better if McAfee was not on it? Because that is a much different show, right? If you remove McAfee, you have Herb Street, Saban, Desmond Howard. And, I think all those guys are great in their own right. They provide a lot to that show, but it is not nearly as energetic, as fun, as clip worthy, which is a big thing these days. And you can debate whether or not that is like a valid way,
or as catered to the audience that's standing there behind them. That's another huge part of it. And I know that's not necessarily what this survey was asking about, but that is part of what makes that show feel alive, is him.
Correct. So I do think this is like two different discussions here. And I think a lot of people in this survey probably used this question as a proxy of their opinion of Pat McAfee overall, and not their opinion of Pat McAfee on College Game Day, because I think it is pretty indisputable, just looking at the ratings, looking at the approval rating of the show in this very same survey, that people really like the direction that College Game Day is going.
It is just sort of the Pat McAfee experience in a nutshell, I think, what we're talking about, where I think there's a lot of sports fans who don't. I think the baseball home run derby thing last year was actually another great example of this. And Ben and I talked about it on the show, where there was just this very like overperformed outrage at his presence there, calling the names like he's, Bruce Buffer or whatever, before Cal Raleigh and co went up on the field. And it was like, this is what the home run derby is. It's a stupid fake competition where we watch people smack the ball as far as they can. If Pat McAfee having fun with it is a problem, then what are we doing here? Like you're just looking for ways to jump on this guy. And I personally have really never had an issue with Pat McAfee as a broadcaster. We've picked plenty of fights with Pat from afar since he joined on with ESPN and took on this national profile, but performing on the game day stage or anything he really does on air in terms of the celebratory nature and the fun and the performance of it, that's the great part about Pat McAfee. That's what makes him so much of a star. That's why he even has the opportunity to make some of the mistakes that he frankly has made, is because he's so damn good at this stuff. So I can't really get behind the people. And I think we're really landing on what the issue is. But the other thing I would point out too is Burke Magnus at ESPN loudly purporting his support on X. Mike Foss, who's McAfee's right-hand man over there, did the same. And just this week, ESPN also released 2025 viewership data for his show in that noon window. We know the game day ratings, we've been talking about those, are very, very high. I don't think this is really a problem. I don't think this is something ESPN is going to pay much attention to at all, as long as the numbers that do matter keep trending this way.
No, it only becomes a problem if McAfee, again, like he did 2 years ago, takes this poll at like face value, right? Like as if half of College Game Day viewers actually dislike him, and he reconsiders his position on the show entirely. I think he's grown since then, maybe not in ways some people would like to see, but I think he's grown in the sense that he has thicker skin overall. Like he's able to take incoming better. Like if you think back to 2 years ago, he was very early on in his tenure at College Game Day. He was very early on in his run on ESPN, which of course, gives him a broader national profile, puts more eyeballs on his show. Prior to that, we're talking about someone who did a YouTube live stream, albeit a very popular YouTube live stream daily, kind of starting during COVID, which is like a totally different time in culture. And it was just much more laid back. You were able to, kind of say things that maybe wouldn't get picked up by media or aggregators that you wouldn't say now. I think McAfee has just grown as a person since then, and it doesn't let things like this get to him quite as much, although he probably will address it in some backhanded way on his show. But that's more of just his style more so than it actually getting to him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you've heard a lot less of the the kicking competition. I think the more that he talked about that, you sort of understood that his main concern was just that he feels maybe like he's run out of ideas for it, and that he's just at the end of the road with making it worth watching more so than
also
tantrum.
ESPN put up your end of the bargain here. Like he's fronting millions of dollars to do this thing that's like the most popular segment on your show other than the picks. Like get a sponsor, start paying for it yourself. Like I think it's outrageous for people to expect McAfee. Yeah,
for sure. The stadiums, doing them all on the field the way that it was at Texas A&M for that first round playoff game. I think that's more likely where that goes. You don't hear about he never really said it publicly, but there were always those weird rumors and reports, mostly from Andrew Marchand, that he was going to like launch his own version of the show or different things like that. That's not really out there so much anymore. So I think that show is his. I think he'll make his mark on it, and the numbers show it. And that's kind of the last point I wanted to make, Drew, is just being so, plugged in with football as we all are in December and January. They have really nailed the two most important studio game studio shows that they have at ESPN, in my opinion. And this is a broader thing, but GameDay, I feel like, is a legitimately really good product right now. Like, I actually, we just absorb this stuff. It can be easy to just suck it down and not even really take in the substance with how much sports TV and content we watch working at Awful Announcing. I enjoy that show. Like, I actually like having it on Saturdays, and I'm constantly impressed by the creativity. They actually talk about things, meaty subjects as well. It's a great balance. And I would say the same thing about Monday Night Countdown. Watching that show last Saturday for Week 18, and then Monday night here, and the mix with Spears, Clark, and Kelsey, I think, is really, really strong. And Van Pelt's an amazing host. And I think that there is something to be said with how much flack ESPN gets, that with those two things, they have really come up with great recipes to make football fans feel at home and comfortable and entertained and informed at the biggest time of the year. Like, it really comes through.
Yeah. And I think it's a testament to the decision-making over there, the willingness to experiment, the willingness to make big splashy moves. I mean, putting Scott Van Pelt in the host seat for Monday Night Countdown, hiring a guy like Nick Saban and Pat McAfee for GameDay. Like, these are not easy decisions necessarily as an executive. You don't know how they're going to work, especially bringing someone like McAfee in, or someone like Saban even, who has no media experience. You don't know if he's going to be able to hold a conversation on television. But all of their major moves have worked out really well.
They laid off Robert Griffin, who everybody would have thought would be a budding star in favor of Kelsey and whatever this arrangement is on the NFL side. So they've definitely taken swings, and you got to nail that stuff when you're basically turning your network into games, which is kind of what they had to do. You got to get that other stuff surrounding the games really, really right.
Completely agree. And they have nailed it. And it's like kind of a weird situation because, for years and years, us here at Awful Announcing and other sites, like, it's when is ESPN going to get this stuff right? Like, they just seem to be, flapping in the wind, trying to figure out something that could work. And even looking over to the NBA coverage, like, they could never get that studio to work. And you know what? Let's just buy inside the NBA. Like, they're really kind of feeling themselves over there in Bristol, and credit to them. Things are working. Yeah.
I was kind of going through the same checklist myself. And until Al Duncan left, they also had really nailed the WNBA and women's college basketball tournament, which you might say is their fourth most prominent one. I mean, NHL, maybe you would say, but they only kind of alternate there. In terms of the properties that they really own, they've made their mark. And I think it shows, especially with, the criticism that they rightly get for some of the way that they've made decisions on the daytime lineup or different announcers and nits you can pick there. I just wanted to shout out those two, pregame studio shows, because they're very, very, they're in a very, very good spot. Thank you for listening to our maiden voyage here on the Everything app, live on X as well as YouTube. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. If you're finding this show on X, we will be back with you 3 times a week going forward here as well. Check out awfulannouncing.com to catch all the sports media content you need in the meantime. Follow us across social media and enjoy your Tuesday.